We need you talking to all of your friends and family, especially about Project 2025. So I am so thrilled, you guys. We have the most amazing panel tonight of women who are just going to be able to answer your questions about this and get you out there having those conversations. So we're going to start off first with an overview from Professor Nancy McLean. I'm just going to give you her background real quick. She's a professor of U.S. history and public policy at Duke University. She's also the author of several prize-winning books, including her most recent, which is Democracy in Chains, I'm losing my page here. The Deep History of the Radical Right's Stealth Plan for America. It's a New York Times bestseller. It was a finalist for the National Book Award, Los Angeles Times Book Award, Lillian Smith Book Award. She has another book that was called Behind the Mask of Chivalry, The Making of the Second Ku Klux Klan, which is coming out in the 30th anniversary edition. So we're going to drop links if you want to check out her new book. But right now, I'm going to turn it over to Nancy. I will spotlight her.
Well, first of all, thank you so much to Julie for organizing this event and to all of you for participating. It is really exciting to be in conversation with my friend Sumi Cho and with Julianne Malveaux, whose work I've admired for years. And I must say, I am thrilled to see so many people on this call, especially after the blockbuster verdict we saw today in Trump's election interference case. A jury of everyday Americans has finally brought some accountability to the man who has so far gotten away with even the violent criminal attack on our country on January 6th. The jury's verdict, guilty on all 34 counts. As a dear friend of mine tweeted today, it looks like orange is the new orange. Anyway, things are looking up, it seems, and that's important because what we're talking about tonight demonstrates powerfully that the election in November is about much more than two men. It is a referendum on who we will be as a country and what legacy we're going to bequeath to our children, whether it will be democracy or authoritarianism. We know that the radical right is laying siege to our institutions because we have watched that happen with escalating force. And because Christopher Rufo, who started the critical race theory panic, announced it using those very words. He said with pride, we are laying siege to our institutions, or rather the right is laying siege to our institutions, were his words. They're doing that for a reason, to serve an ultimate end game. They aim to discredit our institutions in the public eye so as to smash and grab them and then fundamentally remake them and our society and its operating rules permanently. The strategy they have followed, as I learned in my research for Democracy in Chains, is to focus not on who rules, but on the rules, and in particular, how to change the rules so that they could get what they want. We've seen this applied on many fronts since 2010 in particular, with the most sophisticated gerrymandering project we've ever seen in Project Red Map, with voter suppression and union destruction, and so much more. And now, since President Biden and Vice President Harris took office, they are going full-bore reactionary populist authoritarian. So having softened the ground with the measures that they've taken already, the right is moving toward its final endgame. If they manage to win the presidency in November, they plan to go for the gold, for lasting change that cannot be reversed because it will be locked in. Project 2025 is the centerpiece of their plan. Its creation was led by the Heritage Foundation, which has been producing these manuals for Republican administrations since Ronald Reagan was elected in 1980. And the two men who founded the Heritage Foundation made clear from the outset whose interests it would serve. One co-founder was Paul Weyrich, the leading architect of the religious right. The other co-founder was Edwin Fulner, who also ran Heritage for 4 decades. Fulner was a Wharton Business School alum and a right-wing true believer who wanted corporations to be freed from regulation and taxation. So you have that combination, the religious right and the ultra dominating corporations from the beginning in Heritage. The project itself is a nearly 900-page how-to user manual for the next Trump administration, if he's not in orange, but for the next Republican administration. Its key funders are the Koch network and Leonard Leo, who stacked the Supreme Court, as many of you will have read about. So essentially what you have there is the fossil fuel plutocrat theocrat alliance. And together, Koch and Leo have already funneled in more than 22 million to Project 2025. So it's not surprising that over 100 organizations on the right have signed on to Project 2025. These organizations exist to enact their donors' agenda, after all. So Project 2025 is a long and detailed document with dozens of chapters and hundreds of specific recommendations. But here are some headline items to give you a sense of it. A plan to purge at least 10,000 and up to 50,000 career civil servants and replace them with vetted political loyalists, election deniers to boot, so there will be no obstruction coming from those committed to the missions of their agencies, as there was in that first chaotic Trump presidency. Dismantle nearly all environmental regulations, climate action efforts, and all essentially the dirty corporations don't like. Retract long-established civil rights for people of color, women, and LGBTQ Americans, as you'll hear from Sumi and Julianne in more detail. Cease public health mandates, prevent even recommendation of mask wearing and vaccinations. This is, of course, crazy stuff, but it's in keeping with the libertarian dogma that other than armies, courts, and police, all government action is unjust coercion and illegitimate. Project 2025 would also make educational censorship the law of the land. All of America would be subject to the kind of don't say race and don't say gay laws enacted in Florida, Georgia, Montana, and other Republican-run states. It would abolish the Department of Education and send federal tax dollars to fund Christian private schools. You can forget about accommodations for students with special needs in this. It would also grant the president hitherto unheard of powers, including control over the FBI, that would enable rapid, unhindered action of the kind that Viktor Orban, their model, now practices in ruling Hungary. All of it together amounts to a kind of radical executive action to be taken within the first 180 days of inauguration. It would remodel our government to make it a cross between Viktor Orban's regime in Hungary and a new states' rights confederacy in which multinational corporations, fossil fuels in particular as drivers of so much of this, call the shots on political economy, while Christian nationalists use state power to inflict their extreme dogma on the vast majority, turning it into a veritable state religion. And those on the right are not hiding this ambition. On March 8th of this year, the International Women's Day, if you can believe it, Heritage's CEO, a man named Kevin Roberts, hosted Viktor Orban for a several-hour in-person meeting with U.S. allies at Heritage's headquarters and called him, and I'm quoting here, not just a model for conservative statecraft, but the model, the model. So why is Orban their model? Because Orban has used elections to undermine democracy and ensure perpetual power for him and his backers, malevolent corporations and Christian nationalist voters. He has purged the civil service in Hungary and refilled it with obedient loyalists. And this is what Heritage wants to see happen in the United States. We can talk about more about why they're doing this now, if you would like to, in the discussion. But I want to skip to the all-important question of how seriously we should take this threat. And I will tell you that it is deadly serious, and deadly is not hyperbole here. If you consider the climate and public health aspects of Project 2025, again, it would halt all action on the already unfolding climate collapse. So is it likely to be enacted, to have its measures implemented? Well, here's some metrics to judge by. Ronald Reagan implemented over 50% of the Heritage's mandate for leadership for his administration. Donald Trump, in his first administration, implemented well over 60% of their agenda. And here you have to remember that Heritage and their allies see this as a do or die moment. They are desperate to control an America that is fast growing away from them. If you don't believe this could happen, and I'll wrap up with these points. If you don't believe that this could happen, that it will happen if MAGA wins the election, just look to the states behind the red curtain, to Republican-dominated states like mine, to see how they are already remaking America. Sharp cuts in spending for public education, school vouchers for private schools held to no standards, book bans, gag orders for teachers, bringing back child labor, enabling the resurgence of once cured diseases like measles, revocation of heat protections for farm and other outdoor workers, and on and on. So this is real. It is breathtaking, and its cruelties would be catastrophic. The election in November is not a contrast between two men, but a referendum that will decide what kind of country we will become. The stakes are sky high, and we need help from everyone in our latent majority to see that, our families and our communities and networks. So with that, I will turn it over to my fellow panelists, because I know we are not going to let this happen, so we can move on to a little bit more about it and then discussing how we can deal with it. Thanks.
Okay, I was going to say, if everybody on my team could add Julianne and myself to the spotlight. I've got Sumi, we'll bring her up. And I'm just going to give a really quick background so you guys know who else you are hearing from tonight. So Sumi Cho came out of retirement to serve as the African American Policy Forum's Director of Strategic Initiatives, leading the hashtag Truth Be Told campaign, which seeks to counter disinformation and backlash from conservative think tanks, targeting things like critical race theory. So very on brand for what we're talking about tonight. Prior to this, she taught critical race theory, race, racism, and U.S. law and intersectionality for 25 years at DePaul University College of Law in Chicago. She has, I'm going to read her. I could read the whole thing. It will be here for a very long time because she's got an amazing background. She's had all kinds of awards and grants. She has her PhD in ethnic studies, obviously her JD. And I love that she's a parent of twins who recently graduated college. And I totally appreciate that because I have one that just got out of college too. And then we're also thrilled to have Julianne Malveaux here tonight. She was an economist, author, social and political commentator, and a businesswoman. She has her PhD of economics from MIT and holds a lot of honorary degrees. She's the former president of Bennett College in Greensboro, North Carolina. She is a writer. She's been on TV. She has been on radio all over the country on all different types of stations. And I'm just thrilled to have both of these panelists here with us tonight. And I'm going to jump right in. And Sumi, first question is to you. Can you talk about how Project 2025 would specifically impact communities of color? And do you want me to bring the slides back up for that?
Sure, that would be great.
Okay, give me
So,
1 second. You keep going.
like Nancy, I just want to thank Julie Womack and Red, White, and Blue, Trouble Nation. You all have been such wonderful partners with both the African American Policy Forum and the Freedom to Learn, and especially our current Freedom Summer 2024 campaign. So in terms of this question, I think what's really important to understand is that this is, do you remember like before there were screens, how we used to entertain ourselves like with comic books, and they would have that weird like Superman edition that's like bizarro that turns everything upside down, topsy-turvy. You can kind of think of Project 2025 like that they're trying to turn upside down our established notions about our fundamental values, like equality and democracy and racial justice. And part of this entails promoting their big lie that civil rights is anti-white or anti-racism is anti-white, as you see in this billboard campaign, and in the next slide as well, has another version of that. And so this type of narrative is really dominating this Project 2025 campaign, behind which, as Nancy mentioned, are some core right-wing organizations like the Heritage Foundation and the Manhattan Institute that are behind the educational censorship laws and the anti-CRT laws. The dark money, Koch network, Leonard Leo, behind the Federalist Society, has actually put $55 million into Project 2025. And so what does that mean then in terms of the agenda beyond what Nancy has already shared with us? So if you think about, and let me point out that this type of narrative is not new. And it's led by people who actually, contrary to Trump's campaign to drain the swamp, right, led by insiders, for example, by Jonathan Berry of the Federalist Society, who had formerly been in Trump's Department of Labor. And according to him, he felt that labor policy was another target of the DEI revolution, as he put it. And so that's part of what animates his desire to use federal government and agencies to right the ship, so to speak. And the next slide shows you, contrary to what he's saying about how race, sex, and other classifications are being used against conservative and religious viewpoints and those holding pro-life views, you can see, I'm sorry, can you go to the next slide, perhaps? Sorry.
Tell me when to stop.
Oh, sorry. Back. Maybe the one right after Jonathan Berry. Sorry about that. Okay, the Civil Rights Act, right. So you can actually see the language of our actual Civil Rights Act. Well, this is the one from 1866 where President Andrew Johnson vetoed our very first Civil Rights Act, but you can see repeated here that narrative of civil rights as anti-white, right? In which he basically says, here is a law that is going to be made to operate in favor of the colored races and against the white race. Okay. So this is not a new narrative. It's a very old narrative. But if you actually compare what Jonathan Berry was saying, in this slide in terms of what's prompting him and others to come together with this Project 2025, with the actual language of the 1965 Civil Rights Act, you will see that it is simply designed to protect people against discrimination on the basis of their race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, right? So nothing of the kind of what is being asserted. And so when we think about how Project 2025 is seeking to dismantle civil rights, it's doing a number of things. It's really using federal agencies to achieve this goal by seeking to amend, for example, the Civil Rights Act to keep the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission from being able to collect data on race and ethnicity, right? They also want to do away with what's known as disparate impact legal theory, right? Which is really critical to being able to prove that discrimination occurs on the basis of impact and not some explicit policy. They're also trying to limit decisions that would protect employees from anti-LGBTQ discrimination and based on gender. They're trying to rescind regulations that bar discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, transgender status, and sex characteristics. And they want to eliminate or greatly limit the jurisdiction of government agencies, not just the Department of Education, also the Department of Justice by, for example, putting it under the direct control of the president. We also see, if you want to go on to the DEI language slide number 11, you can look at what Project 2025 seeks to do. And I want you to look at this language where they want to delete all of these terms from any federal agency documents, right? Which is very broad. Anything relating to sexual orientation or gender identity, any DEI language, any mention of gender equality, gender equity, right? And now here's what gets me. It says, and any other term used to deprive Americans of their First Amendment rights out of every federal rule, agency regulation, contract, grant, regulation, etc., right? So it's like their basis is somehow having the word gender or reproductive rights or health in a government rule or regulation denies people their First Amendment rights, right? So that's a key aspect that's trying to eliminate and erase this language and these concepts from our daily lexicon and from government concern. You can see the next one too, to restrict sex discrimination to a biological binary meaning and to never conflate sex with gender identity or sexual orientation, right? Now, one thing that is quite clear, they also have in this nearly 900-page document a range of very disturbing, let's call them their worst hits, right? So if you consider in the field of DEI and public education, they seek to criminalize any teaching or discussion of race, racism, racial classifications, and critical race theory in schools. And in fact, if federal employees are caught using, the terms critical race theory or DEI, those are grounds for termination, a fireable offense. Okay. You have the mandate to eliminate the requirement in federal government that federal contractors commit to non-discrimination, right? That's quite startling. Despite our federal laws, they're saying federal, we want to get rid of this requirement, right? We want to dismantle and eliminate any committees, grants, leadership positions, and that promote the leftist woke DEI agenda, right? And so I'll end with just a few with regards to public education as well, because in addition to these, what I want to point out is there are so many negative policy agenda items here in Project 2025. And you can understand on many of the ones that I just reviewed how they impact communities of color in a very negative way. But it's also to say that there are many other policies that also impact communities of color disproportionately by nature of what is being proposed. So that when you look at, for example, the policy of ending Head Start preschool for low-income families, and by transforming Title I federal funds that are earmarked to support students from low-income families to be no strings attached block grants that can go to then support private schools through vouchers. We know and understand that many of these provisions were the outgrowth of civil rights movement policies, from the mid-20th centuries. And the same goes for all of the policies regarding abortion, regarding climate change, regarding labor, etc. So this is all very disturbing, and I want people to think about both the provisions that clearly implicate race and maybe less clearly so, and those disparate impacts.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. And I'm going to kick it over here to Dr. Malveaux. I have a question for you specifically. You are an economist. I forgot to mention in your bio that you sit on the board of the Economic Policy Institute. And so as an economist, can you explain the economic impact of this plan and then specifically how it would impact marginalized communities?
Well, sir, first of all, thanks for the invitation. This Project 2025 thing has been bedeviling me since I heard about it. I mean, really, I have not read the whole 900 pages, but yeah, I've gone through especially the parts that concern me most, like the Department of Labor, certainly the Department of Justice, and looking at some of the issues that we're dealing with. First of all, we have to understand that the federal government is an economic driver, and the economic driver would be cut. And the money that they would cut from various programs would go where? Either tax cuts or basically to fund themselves. In other words, we've seen in the past how they create these agencies, as what's his name, Barry said in the opening to the Department of Labor chapter, we are a Judeo-Christian country, embrace Judeo-Christian values. And then he goes on with several paragraphs to talk about people needing to work. Well, I don't think they're a bunch of lazy people laying around trying not to work. I think that what they basically are trying to do, one of the things they would do is put a work requirement with Medicaid. And that's nonsensical. If someone is on Medicaid, they're already poor, where would these people work? Who would supervise them? Under what terms and conditions? I mean, these are some of the kind of questions that really need to be asked. But again, going back, when you cut federal government, first of all, you are cutting an economic driver. Secondly, you're cutting especially African-American people. African-Americans are overrepresented in the federal workforce. We're about 12.6% of the total population. We're 18.2% of the federal workforce. What's the disparity about? African-American people find better treatment, fairer treatment because of civil service laws under the federal government. Now, it's not perfect, and even within the feds, you see a labor differential. So we still don't make 100% of what our white counterparts do, but we get closer to that 100%, hitting on 80, than we do in the overall labor market. We're underrepresented among Schedule Cs, which are the highest paid, but this thing would just attempt to eliminate Schedule C. When you read through this thing, every time you turn around, they say presidential appointee. So in other words, you would take the early 20th century, which basically our federal civil service system, excuse me, I've got a mouth attachment that I'm getting used to, but the federal service system to prevent patronage. This would take us back to patronage, which means that if he is elected, he can put all his cronies in. And if you read through this Project 2025, what's interesting is all his cronies like Barry, Peter Navarro, I guess he wrote his chapter from jail, but he's included there. And there are many of the other sort of hangers-on that clearly will have a role in federal public policy. So it's really quite scary, and especially for the African-American community and other communities of color. But I lead with the African-American community. And when you look at what would happen, cutting any kind of anti-discrimination enforcement, what will happen with the Department of Justice? Kristen Clark has done an amazing job at the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice in pursuing rogue cops and others and getting consent decrees. This consent decrees would be abolished. So the Department of Justice would not be allowed to enter into consent decrees with cities. But we know cities, we know what has happened in Minneapolis, George Floyd. We know what's happened in Mississippi, goddamn, with the gang, the police gang that basically violated Black men's rights, beat them, sexually assaulted them, etc. But there's a plethora of cases. Christian has been solid on that, but Project 2025 would not really deal with that. And when one might ask, well, what's the economic impact of that? Fairness should be an economic core value. And we don't have fairness. You basically, as you can tell from enslavement and so many other places, you basically, if you don't have that, what you actually have is a suppression of economic growth. And so we could think about the ways that economic growth will be suppressed, where a portion of the labor market would essentially be discouraged. And then one of the things that I find quite amusing in the anti-immigrant tone that's taken with Project 2025 is that we know that our birth rates are dropping. We know that we will not be able to sustain this country with these very low birth rates. We're below replacement rate. In other words, women are not having more children. We need immigrants, basically, to do our work. We need immigrants to populate our nursing homes as our population gets older. We need immigrant people for all these things, and yet what you have here is like a document that essentially not only discourages immigration, but is actually downright hostile to it. So we were looking at something that my screen on my other computer went out. Oh, well, I'll get back to it. The education piece is also a huge hit for economic growth and development. We know that an educated workforce is a more productive workforce, but we also know that, first of all, dismantling the Department of Education is an attack on poor people, is an attack on Black people. If you take Title I money and send it back to the states in block grants, what do we know about block grants? We know that block grants do not benefit everyone. We know that most states are anti-urban, but most people of color live in urban areas. So when block grant money is distributed, and we've seen this before, I have nothing against rural areas. I think rural areas have issues and challenges and need to be supported as well. But if you have a disproportionate amount of the population living in urban areas, shouldn't they get a disproportionate amount of the funds? Not under this administration. Blue states will probably do a little bit better by urban areas, but maybe not. And we've seen what's happened in the past. And in red states, what do you find? I tell people all the time, I served time in North Carolina. I shouldn't say it like that. I was president of Bennett College, which I loved. North Carolina, not so much. There's something called Have a Nice Day racism, and that's called Bless Your Heart. Yeah, you have a comment, bless your heart. That's North Carolina for screw you, all too often. But in any case, what we know in North Carolina is the anti-urban bias starved cities like Charlotte and Greensboro and Raleigh and put lots of money into the urban areas. To the rural areas. Again, nothing wrong with rural areas, but can there be some kind of per capita distribution that speaks to if there are this many people in this city, this portion of this should go to them. So when you start talking about that in terms of education and eliminating Head Start, let's just think about what Head Start means. Giving young people who have not had opportunities a head start on education. But cutting Head Start essentially cuts children's futures. The Children's Defense Fund has written extensively about this, as have many others. This is, I'm almost speechless when I look at some of the implications of this nonsense. And we should be very clear about the organizations that put this thing together. They had a $22 million budget to do it. In addition to the Heritage Foundation, note the Heritage Foundation, they're so white that years ago, when I used to do a television show, I sent them a Christmas card with some Black people on it and said, I'm just sending this so we can integrate the space. After I had gone to a cocktail party there, looked around, are there any Black people here? But the Heritage Foundation is now Kay James led it for a while, who's an African-American woman, very conservative out of Virginia. But in any case, very conservative, very white, very anti-DEI, everything else. They just want a level playing field, as if you can just do that and history is gone. In the last Trump administration, 65% of their recommendations were accepted. Mr. Trump has said that he's not going to take everything they say because he has this other thing called Project 47. It's his stuff, which is even worse than Project 2025. Far more reactionary, gives him a lot more power. And so we should be very concerned. Anytime Heritage and ALEC, which is a conservative organization that replicates legislation, they basically do model legislation for states. So, you may have an anti-affirmative action thing in Florida or anti-CRT thing in Florida. They will replicate that legislation for every other state, meaning that the people don't have to do the work. They just see, oh, here's a piece of model legislation. So ALEC and Heritage and the whole list of 100 organizations is really quite frightening. I'm not going to go too much longer because I want to hear from questions, but just a couple of other things. When you talk about eliminating civil servants, you're talking about between 11,000 and 50,000 people that they're targeting to be eliminated, separated from their jobs. What impact does that have on the unemployment rate? Where will they work otherwise? Will it have a negative effect on wages because you'll have a labor market somewhat flooded by people who are looking for the same kind of works that other people have? When you hit DEI, et cetera, here's what we know about DEI leaders. A disproportionate number of them are women of color. We've done the research. A disproportionate number of DEI leaders are women of color. So that's a direct attack on women who've checked all the boxes, followed all the rules, done all the work, and now they'll be looking for work. Meanwhile, corporate America, given permission from this Project 2025, is likely to curtail their own efforts on DEI and affirmative action. I mean, affirmative action is a very dirty word for them. Under civil rights, the term they use about being biologically binary, that's a term they use, biologically binary. What does that mean? It means man and women. Does not have any provisions for GBLTQIA people. It does not deal with the trans community. And there's been a huge backlash toward the trans community. And who experiences the most violence in the trans community? Black women. Extreme violence in the Black community. And so all this language is hateful language, but that they've embraced under their so-called Judeo-Christian values. And their Judeo-Christian values are not human values, because I just cringe when these people misuse the Bible to try to make their point about how they want our country to work. They basically want us to go backwards. And they're working very hard for us to go backwards. And therefore, we have to fight like hell to make sure that we don't go backwards. We have to make sure that people are getting out to vote. I'm so sick of these folks who they don't want to vote because they're mad. I just had a conversation with a woman today, Black woman who I thought had sense, until she told me she was not voting because she doesn't like Biden and she doesn't like Trump. I'm like, well, do you stark contrast? That's a stark contrast. So I think I'll stop there. I have piles of other notes. Oh, no. I have one more thing, which is the climate change issue. And the reason why that's important is because, first of all, the African-American community in particular is more likely to be exposed to climate negativity. So we have to deal with that, but we also have to deal with the economic costs of ignoring climate change. We're ignoring climate change, and what are the results? We see hurricanes, tornadoes happening at a much more rapid rate. Scientists have ways to fight this, but these people are a group of climate change deniers. And so we really have to be clear that when you say anti-climate change, you're also talking, frankly, about anti-Blackness. You don't quite have to call it that, but that's what it is. So this is an agenda that is an awful agenda. But it's an agenda. Nobody should be surprised. I'll stop there.
Well, thank you. I want to move on to some questions. I had people submit questions when they signed up. So we have a ton of questions, which I know we're probably not going to get to. If the panelists are okay, we could run over a little bit. But let me know if you have to drop, we can do that. But we call it the after party just to kind of keep it going here. I do want to know how, with all this stuff that they can do with this plan, like how do they do that and not violate the Constitution? And so I'll kick it back to you, Dr. McLean. Like,
it's a good
people
question.
are wondering, like, there's no way this can happen because that violates the Constitution. So how do you answer that?
It's a really good question. And one would think that it wouldn't be possible because so much of this does violate the separation of powers. But that's where I think we have to be aware that this same network has worked for a very long time to change constitutional understanding, investing in particular fields of law, going back to the 1970s, to fund litigation that brought us decisions like Citizens United and so many more. I don't even want to list them because I want to make sure we get a lot of questions. questions. And also Leonard Leo, funded by Koch, the Koch network and others, worked so hard to secure that 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court. And it is that 6-3 majority with 2 members who should be recusing themselves but won't, that has kept Trump from being accountable for his criminal attack on the country on January 6th. So unfortunately, we cannot rely on our institutions to fix this for us. It is going to take all of us mobilizing in our communities, as Red Wine and Blue is doing so beautifully around the country, to address this. And I just have to say, I love looking at the chat here, because it just makes your organizers are so on top of everything and plugging people in. And that's what it's going to take. I think this election and this change that we need over the next decade and more is going to be driven by the grassroots. We can't rely on institutions that have been captured, sadly, by the exact forces that are fighting us.
I'll give the other 2 panelists a chance if you want to answer that. I'm going to try to get a couple more questions in, and then we'll see. I haven't looked at the chat. I guarantee there are a ton of questions. Julie can nod. Oh yeah, I see Julie nodding her head. There are. So anybody else want to jump in on that, or I can move to a different question?
I have a quick answer, but I'll go after Julianne.
Okay. One quick thing is that the regulatory agencies are not regulated by the Constitution. So you're talking about, like, they would want to get rid of the Office of Federal Contract Compliance, which actually looks at who gets contracts, who gets federal contracts. They're talking about eliminating it or eliminating its powers. That is not dealt with under the Constitution. Only the cabinet departments are dealt with under the Constitution. So as presidents have gone on, we've often created regulatory agencies, and that's one of the things that they would like to get rid of.
Dr. Cho.
I also want to refer back to what they are talking about. When you think about federal employees and what they are supposed to be doing, there's, there are what are known as presidential hires that may be partisan, but then there's also, what was referred to career employees that are supposed to be hired on the basis of merit. Mm-hmm. And that's the key category that they're seeking to eliminate. And the slides, and you don't have to bring it up again, but if you want to just Google Project 2025 questionnaire, the New York Times posted all of this lengthy questionnaire that they're using to create their MAGA LinkedIn network from which to replace the 50,000 employees with. And so they call it their Presidential Personnel Database and their Administration Academy questionnaire. The first question starts out asking people, now think about this as a mom, because I have 2 kids that just graduated college. And if they were asked this battery of questions, I assure you, they would not be employed right now. The first question that they ask them about their political affiliation or philosophy. And you're supposed to pick between traditional conservative, fiscal conservative, libertarian, moderate, social conservative, neoconservative, liberal, paleo-conservative, and progressive. So 5 kind of like versions of conservative.
What is a paleo-conservative?
Right,
Exactly. You don't even want to go there. Trust me. It's, yeah.
And then I just want to
ugly.
A few of the screening questions that they ask. Do you agree with the following statements? And you're supposed to either agree, disagree, or press neither. The police in America are systematically racist. The gender wage gap is the result of prejudice and discrimination. The education industry should be opened to increased competition through vouchers or tax credits for private schools. Life has a right to legal protection from conception to natural death. The permanent institutions of family and religion are foundational to American freedom and the common good. And finally, this is not all of them, but this is the last one I'll share with you. The president should be able to advance his or her agenda through the bureaucracy without hindrance from unelected federal officials. Okay? So now we have a very serious extremist political litmus test that's in place for, federal career employees that are supposed to be hired on merit and experience to carry out, what they're hired to do within federal agency missions.
So out of curiosity, is this a plan that will be supported, in your opinion, by all Republicans who are elected in the next cycle? Is this going to be like a mandate for them? And then what's the impact? Because, we hear a lot about Congress, but what's the impact on like state level or local
Right.
level? Is this something that's going to be implemented all the way down to like your school board and your city councils?
Yeah, this is so important, Julian. I think it speaks to the transition we want to make to what do we do about all this. And I actually had some comments that I didn't end up getting to, because I wanted to stick to that 10 minutes. But the truth is, this thing is so outrageous and affects so many people in such horrific ways that it is a gift, I believe, to us, this Project 2025, that they announced this already and they called it a promise, right? Why do I say that? Because they are attacking everyone and everything that the vast majority of the country people support, right? Every single one of the things that they're attacking has an important constituency for it and broad support. So I think what we need to do is jujitsu this. And for those of you who know jujitsu, it's like you use the strength of your opponents against them, like the right to jujitsu, the idea of civil rights. We need to jujitsu Project 2025 and this enormous, outrageous, audacious power grab against them. One of the ways we do that, to your question, Julie, about Republican candidates and elected officials, I think groups on the ground, including all your wonderful members in Red, Wine, and Blue, should start pitching this question to people running for office, right, or running for re-election. Do you support, if they're Republicans, because no Democrats are going to support it, it's not for them, but do you support Project 2025? Don't let them weasel out, right? Say, well, this is promoted by the Heritage Foundation and 100 other groups. I want to know if you will support this when you are elected. And the beauty of that is it drives a wedge between them, right? Between on the one hand, their donors and their MAGA voters. They either have to be loyal to them and risk losing all the other voters and therefore not gain office, or if they try to walk away from it, they're caught in a situation they can't win. So I think that is one really, really crucial thing that can be done here, and it should be done every time they come out, and preferably with your phone camera out, right, to record.
Absolutely. No, I think that's so important. I think that's a really good point. I think the other point to note is that, like with organizations like ALEC, I mean, rot starts at the top and trickles down. In other words, we can expect that some of this will happen at the school board level. We can expect that it'll happen at the state legislature level. In red states in particular, we can expect to see almost think about, what was his name? Scott Brown, the one who was the governor of Wisconsin.
Scott Walker.
Scott Walker, thank you. Think about him and what he tried to do in that state. Basically destabilizing collective bargaining. It starts at the top and it trickles down. And so I expect that if that man is elected, there will be cataclysmic effects at the state and local level. Now, the challenge, someone, I just answered someone in the chat, which is a reason why I shouldn't multitask, but I think her name was Natalie, I forgot. Whoever you are, my sister, I apologize. But you asked a question about, but basically she was saying that it's hard to vote for Democrats when they don't do what they say they're going to do. The question is, do you want the devil or do you want someone imperfect? I think we can all agree that the orange man is the devil. I think we also all agree that most Democrats are imperfect. And the Democratic Party certainly has an imperfect history around women, around people of color, but it's gotten better. Kamala, I think, brings some really good gravitas, to this administration. She's not perfect either, but then except for Jesus Christ, I don't know anybody who is. And he screwed up a couple times too. So when we look at it that way, but it is hard. I mean, you got increasing numbers of Black men who are interested in that administration. I have a sibling that last time we were together, we had a fist fight over that man. And his thing is, he's an entrepreneur. He makes a lot of money. This is appealing to people. This is appealing, especially to Black men who have a very hard time in the economy, just like Black women do. But of course, they always say, "Oh my, it's anti-Black men." So we have to figure out a narrative to talk to them, to help them understand that man is not going to invite you to Mar-a-Lago. Your grandchildren are not going to be playing with his grandchildren. This is, he talks a good game, but he does not produce. And yet the Democrats, I'll tell you, I appear regularly on Roland Martin Unfiltered, which is some people will know about it, some won't, but it's a live stream television show. And one of our constant themes, we talked about it last night, was the poor job that the White House does in telling our story. I mean, Biden has done a lot of great work, but I don't think that they've done a great PR job. And so while you have these people telling you what they're going to do, you have the Democrats being mostly silent. And I think it's unfortunate. We really have to energize the Democratic Party to tell the story more effectively and a lot more frequently.
Well, I'm
Can
gonna
I just
kind
jump in there,
go ahead.
Julianne? Because I think it's important. I hear this a lot, but I think it's also important to remember we've never been in a situation in this country where we have one whole media network, a right-wing ecosystem that is constantly transmitting and creating the agenda of the Republican Party, whereas the rest of the media has fallen apart in important ways in recent years, with the decline of subscriptions, et cetera. So, I'm on lists where I see people coming out with very important and good messages, but trying to get those to the grassroots is hard. But I think this speaks to something that it was in the chat too about to the state level. Like, we lost all this power and all of these terrible things happened because we only focused on national elections, right? I mean, there's other reasons, but one reason was we lost sight of the critical importance of state legislatures, right? And of state politics. And so one of the things that so excites me about groups like Red, Wine, and Blue is you're not going to do that, right? Like, that state legislatures matter for everything from education to your water quality to your kids' schools to all of these things. So we have to have Democratic candidates running in every district for every office, right? And transform these states. And I know in my state of North Carolina, and I saw there's several others here from North Carolina, we've had a transformation in the state leadership, right? We have an extraordinary leadership team now that is running in every county in North Carolina. They're running for every office. Their messaging is fantastic. Their candidates are impressive. So I think, we need to stop talking about Biden and Trump, because I think if we just talk about those two older white men, we lose people. But if you go down from that level and look at the extraordinary, figures that we have in Congress, in the state legislatures, in other places, we have really good people who are trying to transform this country, who are trying to deliver, trying to, transform the party, and who are trying to deliver for the country. And they're actually pulling off some pretty amazing things with very, very tight margins. FDR had a huge majority. LBJ had a huge majority. They had 60. And if it weren't for Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin, we would have had some really great stuff, including the kinds of structural democracy reform we need. So I think we have to just keep pushing, keep messaging from the grassroots up, keep talking to neighbors, friends, congregations, alumni, fellow students, just everywhere, bringing this popular education, bringing the energy that tells people this is an existential election, and supporting one another in this all-important work of reclaiming and renewing democracy so that it actually functions finally for all of us, right? But we can do that, I think, if we bring the energy and the commitment and the vision that it requires.
I know that we are at time, so I'm going to go into after party mode. If any of our panelists need to drop, I understand. I'm going to maybe just go for another 15 minutes because I know there were a lot of questions in the chat. And I know you guys gave so much information and we didn't get through like half the questions that I had planned. So, but I'm going to ask, this is a big question that came up again and again and again. So I'm going to kick it, Dr. Cho, you could start with this one. So, number one, I also want to say, I know we're dropping in the link, Red, Wine, and Blue has a webpage about Project 2025. It's a good explainer. It's a summary. You can definitely find newspaper articles. Please tell you, don't go to their website because then you're just going to drive traffic to it. There's tons of other sources to look for it. Look for information that you can share with your friends and family. But Dr. Cho, I wanted to ask you, so we have all of those friends in our network who you want to go talk to them and they're going to be like, that sounds absurd. That's never going to happen. Like, the disbelievers, how would you recommend people approach this topic with like friends and family? I know you're not going to convince the MAGA people, but like the people who could be convinced and just maybe think this is hyperbolic.
I
Well,
think
you know,
I'm sorry, whoever talking, go ahead.
and please call me Sumi.
Okay.
I retired from academe, so
Well, you're all
I-
doctors, so I wanted to be respectful. So.
no hierarchies here. So
Okay.
We're
I
all
guess-
canvassers too, I'm guessing.
Yeah,
I just
that part.
want to point out that it's interesting because when all this started with the Trump Executive Order 13950 back in the fall of 2020, and my executive director, Kimberly Crenshaw, was trying to talk to a lot of civil rights leaders and political leaders to say, oh my gosh, you know, we've got to really respond to this. Janae Nelson from the LDF did answer that call, and together, you know, try to do, you know, what was possible, brought lawsuits that did prevail, et cetera. But what they kept hearing was, well, you know, Biden's coming in. This is overblown. It's all going to go away once Biden is elected, right? He's going to reverse that executive order. And he did in January, as soon as he was. But then we saw what happened. And that was the power of ALEC that both Julianne and Nancy were talking about. This infrastructure that's designed to disseminate these 50 state campaigns and to use AstroTurf, you know, parent groups to build, you know, the public call for that. And now what do we have? We have educational censorship laws in the form of Don't Say Race and Don't Say Gay laws that are now passed in nearly half the United States, impacting 22 million children, which is almost half of our public school children, right? They did that in a stunning, like 2 years, right? So it is happening. And what they're doing, that started at the top, the federal government, then it disseminated devolution to the states, and now it's coming back to use the state prerogative on education to federalize education policy at the top. So I think just like what Nancy was saying, let's use the majority that we know that we have as parents, right? As taxpayers, as residents, to say that we are outraged by these attempts to abolish public education, to disseminate higher education, to essentially promote income inequality in public schools, right? To transform Title I funds, to take away Head Start from the most vulnerable families, right? That's not something I hope any parent would stand for. And I think that you can use your incredible platform for generating exactly that kind of moral outrage, right? Because that's what they've done. They've inverted everything to try to reclaim the moral high ground. And it's high time that we take that back.
Thank you. And I'm bringing Julie, my coworker up here because she's got audience questions. And so I do want to make sure we get at least a few of those. I know we can stay on her all night to go through those questions, but we're not going to do that.
No.
So Julie, if there's a couple of questions, we'll end with a little more hopeful question so we can walk away. And
So, you know, someone asked, what's the strategy? So if you had to say one thing for folks to do tonight, what would be the one thing that you would ask people to do immediately tonight?
I would say reach out to 10 people and share what you learned. Reach out to 10 people and ask them, because most people haven't heard it. This was in the chat too, but most people haven't heard about Project 2025. So they really don't know what it is. I write for the Black Press, and one of my editors called me. I wrote a piece on, I think Monday, I forgot. But anyway, called me. He said, I never heard of this. Explain it to me. And I said, yeah, okay, you're an intelligent man with a degree from somewhere. Have you ever heard of Google? But you know, and I would say one other thing. Reverend William Barber is a dear friend. Many of you in North Carolina are familiar with him because he started there. He's on the NAACP board. He is doing his a national march for moral leadership on June 29th. He has people coming from all over the country here to Washington. I think they have people from about 40 states. They don't have from all states, but about 40 states. But Google Reverend Barber or the Poor People's Campaign or something like that.
Moral Mondays.
Well, yeah, we get a lot of power when we work as a collective. And the work that his team has done shows that while we talk about poverty being about 40 million people, when you count the near poor, people who are near poor, 125% of the minimum wage, et cetera, you end up with almost 130 million people. Now, some of these people, unfortunately, drank the Kool-Aid, but many of them just need conversations. So that's why I say call 10 people. You don't have to call them all tonight, send an email. But a lot of people don't know, and they truly do believe that a Trump administration will benefit them. And they don't understand what they will lose. And that's if you're going to put work requirements on Medicare, come on now. If you're going to cut SNAP, they said they want to cut SNAP, that's food stamps. That's food that people depend on. So start reaching out to people, make it conversational, not confrontive, because people tend to get defensive, but make it conversational and just Matter of fact, go through Project 2025, some of it, and list 5 things. Did you know that Medicaid will be cut? Did you know that, I had a debate with a white woman from West Virginia not years ago, it was like right before Trump came in, but that was years ago. And she was like, all the things that Trump was going to do, and he was going to cut federal spending. She was a little bit older than me. I said, do you get Social Security? She said, yeah. I said, that's going to be cut too. Do you understand that you're voting to cut yourself? How does your mama live? She said Social Security was her primary source of income. I said, how many siblings do you have? She said, why do you ask? I said, because y'all gonna have to make up that money. So I hope you have a whole lot of siblings, because you have to divide that up. So I'll stop there, because I do have a tendency to run on. I saw somebody, they didn't tell me to shut up nicely. What they said was, we want to hear more from other people. All right, I got you.
Okay. Well, we'll take that question to Sumi or Nancy too. Like, what's the one thing you'd recommend people do after they leave this call?
Sumi, why don't you go?
If I may do 2 things. First, I want to say we are delighted that we are partnering with Red, Wine, and Blue on our Parent Majority Toolkit. And we did that for May 3rd, but we're extending it through Freedom Summer. So please check that out. And it's doing exactly what y'all are so great at doing already. Educate, congregate, activate with one another. And someone was asking in the chat, can you provide us with some conversational tools? Well, we've got all of that in the toolkit, and even scripts and even slides and video clips from when Nancy and Katie Paris came on our homeroom on April 18th. So that's one thing. The second thing is, please register for our event a week from today, our first Freedom Summer 2024 homeroom, at which we will be talking about this very important win that was handed down this week by the federal court over the District of New Hampshire that struck the first court to strike, the K through 12 educational censorship law. And so we'll be bringing folks who worked on that case, plaintiffs, attorneys, stakeholders, to talk about what that means. And we're calling it When We Fight, We Win.
All right, Nancy, what about you? One thing you want people to walk away from doing tonight?
Yeah, well, I totally agree with what's been said about, connecting with other people. And I would just say too, sharing resources with those people, like if you went and wrote down the list of like 10 people in your network that you were going to contact, who you think are leaders and who might communicate with others, you can do that. I think the Red, Wine, and Blue explainer on Project 2025 is great to include in that, and the social media stuff that you all have. 2 other groups that are tracking Project 2025 that I want to alert support people to include in that sharing of resources. One is called Accountable, and they have good stuff up about Project 2025 and are doing work. And there's also a group called Democracy Forward that is actually predominantly people in the legal world who are trying to essentially harden the federal government against the horrors that are coming if this happens. So there are people on the job figuring this out, doing the litigation, preparing for this. And they have also developed a national coalition that is having regular working groups and in a number of the areas that we've talked about. And those working groups speak to something that people raised in the Q&A about wanting more short form, materials to use and social media tools to use. So I can say that, there are groups that are working on that. And again, use the Red, Wine, and Blue wonderful materials explainer, Accountable, and then check out Democracy Forward. And if you're with another organization on this call, you could also consider joining that coalition as an organization so that you hear about all the developments, that will be coming as we go forward. But I'm really excited that I see so many more groups of all kinds paying attention to Project 2025 and realizing how important it is for Americans to understand going into this election. So I just applaud you all on the work you're doing in Red, Wine, and Blue. And, I'm here for you if you need people to help convey the message in, states or other constituencies or other ways. Don't be shy.
All right, well, we have a couple of minutes left. I'm going to have Julie see if there's one more question. We'll do some short answers from panelists. And I got one final question for the end, and then we'll give you guys your evening back. And I am 100% certain that we will be having another event around Project 2025, just because obviously there was huge interest. Julie?
Yes. So I'm going to do one that I was going to do for last anyway. But Julie, you are going to send an email out like always, right? With the links and how to contact our panelists and such, right?
Yes, I will do that. It won't be tonight, but I will do that tomorrow.
Okay, perfect. So that way, folks who have some specific questions, maybe they can ask, that way. But I like this question to end with: how do you maintain hope? And how do you not get overwhelmed by this? Folks need to know what to do when it seems. Oh.
I can start here. I believe, and there is research to bear this out, that activism is an antidepressant, right? When you get active with people who share your values, who understand why you're outraged, who want the changes that you want, it really buoys your spirit, and these are horrible things, but you find you have a lot of laughs along the way, as I'm sure you do in Red, Wine, and Blue, given your name and all that you do. So I think there's that. I will also say I'm a historian, and that sustains me. I'm a historian of social movements and political economy in the US. And if we think we've got tough times now, think about, the enslaved and abolitionists in the 19th century in the run up to the Civil War. And one thing I've been doing lately is a deep dive into the 1850s, when it seemed like all was lost. It seemed like what people called the slave power dominated every branch of government, the national media, the clergy, the higher education, all of it. People were almost giving up. And then, as these guys always do, the slave power grossly overstepped, passed the Fugitive Slave Act, started bloody wars in Kansas and Nebraska to try to turn them into slave states, and the Supreme Court handed down the Dred Scott decision. And between those, that radicalized all these white Northern male voters who hadn't been paying much attention at all to the abolitionists, were not part of the movement, but suddenly they realized, oh my gosh, these guys are coming for my freedoms. These guys are out to destroy the country I thought, that I belonged to. And that's really what turned the tide. So I think the critical thing to know is just keep working, even if it seems like it's not yielding. If you need a few days down, take a few days down, right? But just continue the struggle, because so often people give up just before they're about to break through, right? So that's why we need one another. That's why we need events like this. That's why, we got to realize they had a patient long game. We need one too.
Rest is very important. When you feel overwhelmed, it's okay to get off the treadmill for a minute. There's this book by this woman. I keep it on my desk, actually. I don't know if y'all can see this, but it's called Rest is Resistance. It's my young sister who they say she started the nap ministry. Nap, like get you a nap. And it's a really, I mean, I think that there was someone in the chat, they said, I belong to so many organizations, what do I do? Well, pick one that you give most of your time to, because you can't do everything. So say, okay, this is going to be my issue. But I just think that first of all, we have to take care of ourselves. Leaky vessels cannot carry anybody's water. And so if you're tired, any of those things, if you're overwhelmed, I think we just have to stop for a minute. And then I think what, essentially what Nancy just said, I mean, people buoy our spirits. Like-minded people buoy our spirits. So, I mean, I am a part of the morning meditation ministry at my church, and it brings me enormous joy. It's helped me become closer to my holy parent through organizing meditations, providing them. But everybody's not religious, and you don't have to be. But find a group of like-minded people who you can talk to, cry with, vent to, because all of those things are really important. And then I think that, especially for women, please do not be, what do they call them? Don't give yourself imposter syndrome. Step up to leadership. There are many people who have enormous leadership potential, and they think, why me? Well, why not you? I mean, we need more women running for office. We need more women mentoring people who are running for office. We need people putting together fundraisers and doing all that. And, if you're younger and you have kids, of course, that's your number one priority. But still, I just every day, do something. That's what Dr. King once said, do something. So the option is not to do nothing. The option is to do something to make sure that our society is a better place.
Thank you. That's so true. I'm going to give Sumi the final word and we're going to sign off. What gives you hope?
I do think that it's really interesting in this moment. I mean, I did come out of retirement, and now I'm working harder than I ever have before, longer hours and like really hard work. And yet work has never been more fulfilling. And that is because of the things that both Julianne and Nancy said, because of the importance of the work and what we get to do and what we learn from in doing that together in community. You are also fortunate to have an organization like Red, Wine, and Blue, because I think y'all have been so smart about being effective, but also recognizing that you need to enjoy each other's company and build community at the same time. I love the title that Julie offered for our sample gatherings for the activation. They were like Palomas, Politics, and Project 2025, right? So it's kind of like, you're going to come, we're going to have a good time, we're going to have a drink after a long day at work, and then we're going to get real about what you need to know and what we can do, while managing, our kids' schedule, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that we are in this position, like all of us. You think back of what your parents had to undergo to make possible what you're doing now. My parents came from a country that was under colonialism and occupation. They went through World War II and the Korean War before coming over to the United States, where I was born during an era of Asian exclusion. I don't even know all the stories of what they suffered, and I never will, because they both passed, sadly. But I do know, that legacy is something I feel obligated, in terms of that trajectory to pass on to my kids, right? And so as moms and as parents, we always have to have hope, in order to ensure that there is that better future for our children and all children going forward.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much to our entire panel for coming on tonight and then for staying on the 20 minutes longer than I scheduled you for. I appreciate that. And then I know in the chat there was people dropping things about Rally Your Squad, and exactly what you heard here tonight was talk to your friends, talk to your friends, talk to your friends. You guys can go to our website at redwine.blue to get information on all of this stuff, including our upcoming events, and you can sign up. So again, thank you so much to our panel. I really appreciate you being here tonight. Julie, thank you for digging through, I'm sure, a very long chat to find questions. And I'm sorry we did not get to every single question in the chat, but I promise we'll come back and do another event on Project 2025 because it is too important not to learn more and more about